ISRO has done it. ISRO has nailed the Chandrayaan-10 lunar landing. The Vikram rover has deployed on the moon. It's done a soft landing. The Pragyan rover is now out on the lunar surface. It's perfect. It's a full, complete success. India has become the first nation to do a soft landing in the lunar South Pole region. It's become the second nation in the 21st century to do a soft landing on the moon, and the fourth nation overall. Brilliant job. The entire country is grateful to ISRO, and the ISRO has the world's respect and admiration, and in some quarters the world's envy as well from certain countries, especially the UK. Some people in the UK are envious, and they have expressed certain ideas and thoughts about what's happening. So there's a few questions here now. Why are some people in the UK envious and jealous of India's achievement? Secondly, should we in India be proud of ISRO's achievements on a very limited, tight shoestring budget? Is that something we should be proud of? And then the third question is, what next? What comes next for ISRO? How should ISRO proceed forward after this great achievement? Please subscribe and let's find out. So, there are some people in the UK, first of all, let's take that up first, who have said that the UK has donated 2.3 billion dollars to India, billion pounds to India in aid between 2016 and 2021, and they are saying that India should return this aid money to the UK because India is now a space power and we are able to invest so much money in space. So why do we need British aid? And they are also kind of blaming India for not lifting people out of poverty despite having a space program and so on and so forth. So how much truth is there to this, and is this factual, or is this just frustration and jealousy from some people in the UK? So let's understand that all of this so-called aid that the UK gives to India, it's actually given to Christian missionaries and to certain NGOs that work towards destabilizing India and towards furthering the UK's geopolitical interests. This money, the so-called aid that they are funneling into India, it's not used for poverty alleviation or any such thing. It's used for the UK's benefit. It's used for furthering Christian conversions in India and for aiding NGOs that work towards destabilizing India and have an anti-India outlook. That's what the UK is doing. That's the kind of activities that they are funding. So that aid is something that is not given to the Indian government or the people of India. It's given to these vested interests within India that serve the UK's interests. So we don't need your money. We don't need your poisonous money. And understand that the UK, whatever aid it seems to have given, so-called aid, whatever money was funneled into these activities, amounts to less than 0.1% of India's GDP. It's completely insignificant, and it's even more insignificant if we take into account purchasing power parity. And then there's the factual matter of the fact that the UK plundered about $45 trillion worth of money in today's money from India, right? So, so what about that? I mean, should we start demanding that back? Reparations, 200 years, 2 centuries plus of foreign occupation, British occupation, in which they totally destroyed India's economy, reduced India to utter poverty and abject poverty and penury, and now they are claiming that India should return their money. What money? It's the UK that needs to give in India money. And when it comes to India not doing enough to alleviate poverty, I mean, there's a UN report that demonstrates that India has lifted 415 million people out of poverty in the past 15 or so years. There's an IMF report that says that India has almost wiped out extreme poverty. So India is doing fantastically well. And India isn't poor because of some defect in India's culture or society or civilization. India is poor. It's a temporary state of affairs. India is poor because the UK destroyed India. So they should be the last people to come and point fingers at us. It's just jealousy and frustration. The UK used to be the world's only superpower, the great empire, while the UK abdicated. It was made to give up its empire status, its world power status in 1958. With their humiliation in the Suez crisis, and today the UK is not a second-rate world power. It's a third-rate world power. It doesn't have a space program of its own. Its nuclear warheads are mated to American nuclear missiles and so on. So it's just jealousy, petty jealousy and frustration that we are seeing from them. We in India should just ignore these people, right? And then there's another interesting piece of news. The London-based news agency Reuters recently put out an infographic of the various moon landings that have happened thus far. And obviously, only four nations have achieved moon landings: the US, the USSR, China, and India. In the infographic, they put India as other. Like if there were 15 other countries apart from these three countries that had landed, then it makes sense to put the that as other, categorize that as other. But instead of other, they could have written India, but they chose not to. So they are also trying to downplay India's achievement. So yeah, you can see a lot of jealousy coming out of the West from certain quarters. Most people seem to be happy, as they should be. I mean, we also celebrate other nations' achievements in space, right? So, so it's something that we are doing, like the Prime Minister said, to some extent for all humanity. So, so that's how it should be. But some people are jealous, and that's fine. Some people will be jealous, and it's something that we should take positively. It demonstrates how far we are progressing, and there are so many rich countries that don't have the ability to do things that we currently have, and we are going forward with that. So it's a good thing. Secondly, next question is: should India be proud of its ISRO's achievements on such a tight budget? So, for example, like many people have said, Chandrayaan-3, the mission, its budget was $75 million in US dollars, which is less than the budget of various Hollywood movies like Gravity, which had a budget of $100 million, The Martian with a budget of 108 million. Then you had Interstellar with a budget of I think 165 million, and Avatar had a budget of 230 something million dollars. Moon landing was done at a fraction of the budgets of these Hollywood movies. Is that something that India should be proud of? And let's put this in more perspective by seeing the by comparing the budgets of the Indian space agency ISRO with other nations. For example, NASA has a budget of about $25 billion annual, right? The Chinese space agency has a budget of about $9 billion, while ISRO has a budget that fluctuates between apparently I think 1.5 to 1.9 billion dollars. So ISRO's budget is a fraction of what China spends on space and the US spends on space. So I think it's not something that we should be happy about. Sure, we should be proud of what ISRO has achieved on such a tight budget, but that's not how the situation should be. We need more funding. Imagine if ISRO gets $5 billion per year or $10 billion per year. Imagine how much of its latent potential will be freed up and unleashed with that sort of funding. So what ISRO needs is more funding. And then the question obviously arises, isn't that money that's wasted? Isn't that frivolous expenditure, space exploration, when we have so many problems here on Earth? Well, every nation has problems. The US has poverty. China has poverty, right? It may not be that visible, but it's there. In the 20th century, the USSR had a lot of poverty, and China had an immense amount of poverty in the 20th century, and yet they built up these space programs. There's a reason for this, and I've gone into this in a previous video. Imagine a situation 5 centuries ago when certain nations, when a handful of nations decided to invest in shipbuilding technology and in sailing the oceans of the world. And at that time, it would have looked like a frivolous waste of money, but those are the nations that became the colonial superpowers. And I'm not condoning colonialism. Colonialism is evil. We in India have suffered immensely from that, right? And Christopher Columbus, as we know, was a genocidal monster. I am not condoning colonialism, but that's just the way the world works. If you have the technology and the ambition, then you're going to conquer the world. And at that time, nobody knew what were the benefits of sailing the oceans. But then it became apparent sooner or later. I mean, reasonably soon. Similarly, today, space is the next big frontier. It's the big domain that's opening up to the world. And the few nations that will invest in space exploration are the nations that are going to lead the world economically and geopolitically. So space is going to give access to these nations to an enormous domain full of resources and opportunities. And 20 to 30 years from now, if India does not invest in space exploration, our future generations are going to curse us for not having the vision and the ambition and the foresight to see what space exploration give can offer to a nation and a culture. So that's why India needs to invest more in ISRO. We need to have a budget that's multiples of what it is right now. And then the question is, what should ISRO do next? So we have a couple of projects coming up, couple of missions. In a week's time or so, in early September, there's going to be the Aditya L1 mission, which is going to be a mission that will study the sun from the L1 Lagrange point, Earth-Sun Lagrange point. And there's soon going to be a Shukriyaan mission, a mission to Venus. There's going to be Gaganyaan and so on. These are missions in various different domains. One goes to the L1 Lagrange point and studies the sun. One goes to Venus. One is low Earth orbit human space flight. All right, but what about the moon? We have achieved a certain level of success on the moon. I mean, tremendous success. Should we not build on that? Should we not have a long-term vision and ambition? So I would like to propose a long-term moon exploration, lunar exploration program and vision for India. The question we should ask ourselves is, what should Chandrayaan-10 do and when should Chandrayaan-10 launch? Right? So we know what's happened thus far. Chandrayaan-1 was a lunar orbiter, a satellite that went around the moon, and it had a moon impact probe, and this was a fully successful mission. Chandrayaan-2 was an orbiter and a lander and a rover. The orbiter is perfectly functional right now. It's talking to the Chandrayaan-3 lander and rover. But the Chandrayaan-2 lander crashed, and the rover was also destroyed in the process. That was Chandrayaan-2. Chandrayaan-3 is the recent success, which happened a couple of days ago, and that's a huge achievement for India. What should Chandrayaan-4 do? What should Chandrayaan-5 do? So I would say that Chandrayaan-4 should be something that builds upon Chandrayaan-3's success. It should first of all have an orbiter, and this is a long-term investment. This orbiter should be designed to function for at least a decade, 10 years, right? And it's going to be something that will communicate with future landers on the moon, so as to provide a channel of communication with the Earth, redundancy in that sort. So Chandrayaan-4 should have an orbiter. It should also have a lander, and it should also have a rover. The difference is that the lander should be larger and have more scientific experiments for prospecting the lunar surface, the topsoil and all that, the regolith. And the rover of Chandrayaan-4 should be designed to last at least 3 months. So the Chandrayaan-3 rover that's currently on the moon's surface is going to last 14 days. 14 Earth days, 1 lunar day. It's because the moon has a 14 Earth day long day and a 14 Earth day long night. So during the lunar night, the temperatures plummet drastically. Near the equator, the temperature in the lunar night is about minus 130 degrees Celsius. But at the South Pole, where the Chandrayaan-3 rover is, the temperatures go down to below minus 180 degrees Celsius. So, and this lasts for 14 days. So in the absence of a heating unit, the instrumentation will freeze totally, and it most likely won't come back to night after 14 days when the sun rises again. So that's why, and maybe there's a very small chance that we may be able to revive the lander and rover, but that's a very small chance. So the Chandrayaan-3 lander and rover will operate for 14 Earth days, and that's it. That's the end of the mission. The Chandrayaan-4 lander and rover should be equipped with radioisotope heating units. So heater units. So these are heater units that will have maybe plutonium, and they will keep the systems operating during the lunar nights for 14 days. So the electronics won't freeze completely. The components will survive the lunar night, and hopefully then we can operate the lander and the rover, especially the rover, for a few months. At least 3 months should be the design. So that is Chandrayaan-4. That's what I would like to see. Then the Chandrayaan-5, the next one, should be a sample return mission. So it should have a lander, and it should be a composite spacecraft that has a lander and an ascender. The lander should do a soft landing on the moon wherever we want it to land. It should have a drill drill bit or whatever incorporated into its machinery. It should be able to drill into the moon's surface, maybe a foot or two into the surface, scoop out a sample of soil, rock, whatever it can scoop out, deposit it into the ascender module of the vehicle and seal it hermetically. Then the ascender should take off from the moon and return to Earth and deliver the samples to ISRO. So the samples in the first mission, in the Chandrayaan-5 mission should be reasonably light, maybe 50 grams, 100 grams at most. Yeah. Then Chandrayaan-6 should be a return. It should be a more advanced sample return mission. So the lander should be larger. It should be able to uh, scoop out maybe a couple of kilos, maybe 2 to 5 kilos of lunar soil and rocks, put them into the ascender module, and the ascender module should once again successfully bring those samples back to Earth. So it's going to be a more complex and more advanced version of the Chandrayaan 5 sample return mission, and it will build upon the technology that was demonstrated in the Chandrayaan 5 mission. So that is Chandrayaan 6, a heavier sample return mission. Chandrayaan 7 should be a robotic research station with other advancements as well. So it should be a much larger lander with lots of scientific instruments that can do all kinds of investigations about the moon's surface and in the region where it lands. It should have a lander. The lander will be the large thing. It should have a rover, which should last maybe a few years, and it should also have a drone which will fly around. It should have a certain amount of fuel, which will enable it to maybe do 10 to 15 flying missions, land in different parts of the vicinity of the area, maybe a couple of kilometers here and there, and investigate the topology, the soil, the features, and the resources available in that region. So it will be a lander plus a rover plus a drone. So that's something that is much more complex and much more advanced than Chandrayaan 4, 5, and 6. And the lander could also have a small sealed ecosystem with plants and maybe earthworms or something, and we can see how that evolves over time in lunar gravity. And the rover and the drone can communicate with the Chandrayaan 4 orbiter that was placed in orbit in the Chandrayaan 4 mission. So that's Chandrayaan 7. That's how it should progress, increasing complexity with each successive mission. So Chandrayaan 7 should happen by 2030. So that is an ambitious time frame. We are already in the last quarter, so to say, in the second half of 2023. So 24 to 30 is about 6-7 years. So we should, if we are ambitious enough, and if ISRO gets the funding, we should be able to do Chandrayaan 7 by 2030. Then Chandrayaan 8 should be a rehearsal of a human landing on the moon. That is Chandrayaan 8. So it should have an orbiter plus a lander plus an ascender. The orbiter should be able to house three persons, human beings. The lander and the ascender should be able to house 2 people on the moon. It should also have a rover that can carry at least 1 human being, and the lander can also have various scientific instruments. So this composite spacecraft will move into lunar orbit. The orbiter will stay in orbit. The lander ascender assembly will detach, do a soft landing on the moon. Then it can be on the moon for a couple of days. Deploy the rover, maybe a drone as well, and then the ascender. And maybe it can take some samples and put them in the ascender. And then the ascender takes off from the moon, goes back into lunar orbit, docks with the with the orbiter, and then the orbiter ascender assembly goes out of lunar orbit and returns to Earth. It goes back into Earth's orbit, and then either the orbiter or the ascender can do re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere and land safely on Earth. A very complex mission. So that's something that should happen in the early 2030s. That is Chandrayaan 8. Chandrayaan 9 can be a repeat of this, but in a different part of the moon, so that we make sure that the technology works. It's proven twice. And then Chandrayaan 10 can be the first actual human landing on the moon. So missions of increasing complexity that build upon the achievements and technology that was designed, developed, and proven in the previous mission. That's how you do it, step by step by step. So Chandrayaan 7 ideally should happen by 2030, and by the 20 in the by the mid 2030s we should have the first Indian human landing on the moon, and by 2040 there should be a permanent moon base that can house a few people on the moon. So that's the kind of vision India needs to have. Obviously, some missions may not work perfectly fine, so we need to have contingency plans for that. Maybe Chandrayaan 10 won't be the first human mission, maybe it'll be 11 or 12. But if everything works fine, by the mid 2030s, we should have Indians on the moon. And this is important because by 2025 the Americans are going to send people back to the moon, and by the late 2020s, maybe by 2030 or so, they're going to have yearly moon landings, human moon landings. And the Chinese also have plans to land humans on the moon, maybe by 2030 or so. So if India has this vision and this step by step program, India can land humans, people on the moon by the mid 2030s and have a permanent moon base by 2040 or so. That's the kind of vision that India needs to have, ambitious vision without which there will be no progress. You cannot have one mission to the L1 Lagrange point. I'm not saying these missions that we are doing are not good. They're great, but we should have clear long-term vision and focus for the moon, for Mars, and so on. So that's the kind of thing that needs to happen for the moon. And in the meanwhile, the Gaganyaan program will take off. We will have human spaceflight in low Earth orbit, which will prove a number of technologies like the space suit and the capsule that will house the humans, the astronauts or Vyomanauts, whatever we call them, in Earth orbit. That's something that we will build upon for the human spaceflight mission to the moon. And by 2030 or so, hopefully we will have a decent, reasonably sized space station in Earth orbit. To do all this, India will have to invest in more powerful rockets. We'll have to design and develop more powerful rockets. The current most powerful rocket that ISRO has is the LMV Mark 4, LMV-3 Mark 4, which is a medium lift rocket with which can carry a payload of about 10,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit, which is a decent amount. But India needs to develop heavy lift vehicles. A heavy lift rocket is something that can carry between 20 to 50,000 kilograms of payload into low Earth orbit. So India is currently at the medium lift capability. So we need to develop heavy lift rockets, and India also needs to develop and perfect reusable rocket technology. What SpaceX has perfected, India can also do that. Why not? So these are the things that India needs to do, and also we can also have a long-term vision for Mars. So Mangalyaan 1 was a brilliant success. I believe Mangalyaan 2 will launch in reasonably soon, and I hear it's going to be just an orbiter like Mangalyaan 1, which is fine. So let's have a better orbiter with better payloads, better instruments, and a tighter orbit around the planet. So that's a good step forward. Mangalyaan 3, whenever it happens, should happen soon, should have a lander that will do a soft landing on Mars, which is going to be a whole different challenge compared to the moon, because Mars has a thin atmosphere. The moon does not. The moon just has very wispy plasma. So Mangalyaan 3 should have an orbiter and a lander. Mangalyaan 4 should definitely have a rover and a drone or a helicopter as well. So that's the kind of vision we need to have for Mars. And by the 2040s, we should aim to have Indians, humans on Mars as well. So that's the kind of ambitious vision India needs to have. Only with a long-term vision like this can you have a clarity of thought and proper focus in how to go about the space program and what sort of technologies need to be developed step by step in sequence. So I hope that something like this happens. India has the ability to do this. India has the resources to do this. ISRO just needs the funds to be able to unleash its full potential. So right now we have the Aditya L1 mission that's coming up, the Shukrayaan mission that's coming up, and maybe something else. But I would like to see this sort of long-term vision and focus for the moon, for Mars, and for other aspects of space exploration as well, including low Earth orbit, space station, and all that. So that's the kind of ambition India needs. That's the kind of political ambition India needs. India needs political will for this to happen. And India and ISRO needs funding for this. And the private sector will obviously need to get involved because it will really help ISRO out and lighten the burden. So all of this needs to happen. I'm sure that we are taking steps in this direction, but I would like to see the funding for ISRO increase and the vision for ISRO become clear and ambitious. We have the talent. India has the most brilliant talent in the world, but right now they don't have much opportunities, and ISRO is constrained by its very tight budget. So I would like to see this change very rapidly. In the meanwhile, I would like to once again thank and congratulate ISRO on their brilliant achievement. Best wishes to ISRO for all the future programs. The sky is the limit, and I'm sure that we're going to have a lot more success in the future. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you very soon in the next video.